3 million pages of evidence, thousands of unsealed flight logs, millions of data points, names, themes, and timelines connected. You are listening to the Epstein Files, the world's first AI-native investigation into the case that traditional journalism simply could not handle.
Welcome back to the Epstein Files. Last time, we walked through the cover-up and tested what the records could actually prove without speculation. Today, we are examining the scientists and mapping what the documents show about actors, timeline, decisions, and institutional response. As always, every document and source we reference is available at epsteinfiles.fm. So the first record is a 2019 MIT internal review confirming Jeffrey Epstein donated $9.1 million to the institution, including $736,000 contributed after his 2006 arrest.
That internal review is the anchor. It's the financial scaffolding for this entire structure.
$9.1 million.
It is. But before we even get into the names, into the emails, you have to pause on that top line number, more specifically, the timeline of the cash flow.
Because the total amount in the grand scheme of an endowment like MIT's is significant, but not transformative.
Not transformative, no. But that second number you mentioned, the $736,000, the money accepted after 2006, that is the forensic variable that changes everything.
2006 is the line in the sand. That's the Palm Beach arrest. The beginning of the public, documented record of Jeffrey Epstein as a sex offender.
Precisely. In any kind of forensic audit, the date on a check can tell you more about the recipient's intent than the actual dollar amount.
So accepting nearly $750,000 after a donor has been arrested and then convicted, that's not a clerical error.
It's not standard philanthropy anymore. It becomes a choice, an active decision to overlook a criminal record in exchange for capital. It moves the entire conversation away from fundraising and squarely into the territory of reputation laundering, access management.
And that's our mission here, to conduct a forensic audit of that very specific relationship, the one between Jeffrey Epstein and the scientific elite in Cambridge, Massachusetts.
Right. We have to define the scope. Was this just about money? Or was the money a token for something else entirely?
We're looking at the EFTA series documents for this. The DOJ released emails, the logs, and the pinpoint database entries. The goal is to separate access from philanthropy.
Did the money buy silence, or did it buy entry into the laboratory itself?
It's a question of commodities, isn't it? Normally, a donor trades their capital for prestige. Your name goes on a building, you get a plaque, an invitation to a gala.
A very clear, very public exchange. But the documents we're reviewing here, they suggest a different kind of trade. Capital, not for a name on a wall, but for intellectual credibility, for a physical presence.
We need to map how the barriers to entry were systematically lowered for a registered sex offender at one of the world's most prestigious research institutions.
Let's start with that first block of evidence, the MIT Media Lab donations. We've got the $9.1 million figure. Now, let's drill down into the mechanism.
I think for most people, there's a basic assumption that a university like MIT has. Safeguards. You can't just write a check if you're a convicted felon.
Yeah.
There are supposed to be compliance officers, ethics boards, legal reviews.
That is the right question. How does a sex offender navigate that system? Because in a functional university ecosystem, a large donation goes through a bureaucratic gauntlet.
It's not a simple transaction.
Not at all. A check comes in, it goes to a central development office, it gets logged into a database. The donor is vetted.
Standard procedure.
Standard procedure. And if that donor is classified as high risk, and a registered sex offender is the very definition of high risk, it's supposed to trigger a flag, an immediate flag.
From there, it would go to the legal department, to a gift acceptance committee.
So the system is, in fact, designed to catch this. It's designed to protect the institution's reputation. But the EFTA documents, they show us exactly how that system was circumvented.
They didn't hack the database.
No, they bypassed the gatekeepers. And to understand that, you have to look at the communication channels, specifically the ones involving Joy E.J. Ito.
Ito was the director of the MIT Media Lab at the time.
And he wasn't just some low-level administrator. We have to be clear about his role. Joy Ito was a celebrity in the tech world, a venture capitalist, an early internet pioneer. He carried a massive amount of weight, and with that came autonomy.
The documents show a direct line of communication between Epstein and Ito that seems to completely ignore the standard development office protocols.
It does. Look at document EFTA 023-55897. It's an email about contact protocols. And it states, very explicitly, for general Media Lab email, please use joy@media.meetne.edu.
joy@media.meetne.edu.
That single instruction is the key. In any standard institutional development process, a major donor is directed to a generic email address, something like development@ or giving@. Or they're handled by a specific fundraising officer whose entire job is to vet the money.
But here, the instruction is to go straight to the top, to the personal institutional email of the director himself.
Which effectively removes the compliance officers from the loop. It creates a kind of VIP lane.
If a check or a request comes through the general inbox, a junior staffer might Google the name Jeffrey Epstein, see the mugshot, and immediately raise a red flag.
Of course. But if that email goes directly to Joy Ito, and Joy Ito is already, well, aware of the situation, there is no flag to raise. There's only facilitation.
So the documents show a pattern where this entire relationship was managed almost exclusively at the executive level. It bypassed all the lower-level checks and balances that are supposed to exist.
And this wasn't just about facilitating the transfer of funds. It was about how those funds were recorded, how they were presented to the outside world. This brings us to document EFTA 02512048. It's a crucial piece of evidence when you're assessing their awareness of the risk.
The email discusses how a donation is listed on the MIT website.
This is where we see what you might call knowledge of guilt, or at the very least, knowledge of impropriety.
The direct quote from the email is, "Site now says MIT rather than MIT Media Lab."
Let's decode the logic there. Why would a donor or the person receiving the funds want a donation listed as from MIT in general rather than the specific Media Lab?
It's counterintuitive. Usually you want the credit. If I give money to the Media Lab, I want the Media Lab to acknowledge it. I want my name associated with the futuristic tech, with the specific projects.
Exactly. Specificity is the entire goal of philanthropy. You want your name on the specific lab, the specific research chair, the specific project. But here they're doing the complete opposite. They are diluting the attribution.
MIT is a massive general ledger. It's a multi-billion-dollar entity.
A donation listed under MIT is a drop in the ocean. It becomes almost anonymous by virtue of the sheer volume of transactions. MIT Media Lab, on the other hand, is a specific, much smaller, much more public-facing storefront.
So by shifting the listing to the General Institute, they're effectively washing the donation. They're obscuring the direct link between this toxic donor and the specific department head who facilitated it.
It demonstrates active management of public perception. If you're proud of a donor, you list them specifically. You put their name on the lab's own website. When you're editing the site to say MIT instead of Media Lab, you are actively trying to distance your specific unit from the source of the funds while still keeping the capital.
They wanted the money, but they didn't want the association.
And that's evidence that the relationship was known to be problematic from the inside.
This connects directly to documents EFT 02378831 and EFT 132503211. They further illustrate this deep Joy Ito connection. We see coordination on visits, on logistics. This wasn't a distant donor just mailing in checks.
No, this was an operational relationship. It required maintenance. The documents show a surprisingly high frequency of contact. When you look at the pinpoint database locational data, which we'll get to, the volume of interaction is not consistent with a passive donor. It's consistent with an active participant.
Let's move to that. Block 2. The scientists. We need to name the actors involved here. The documents link Epstein to some very specific, very high-profile names in science.
These emails aren't just administrative back and forths. They involve key figures in the scientific community. The first one that stands out is Ed Boyden.
Ed Boyden is a titan in his field. Associate professor at both the MIT Media Lab and the McGovern Institute for Neurobiological Research.
And to understand why Epstein was so interested in him, you have to understand what Boyden actually does. He's famous for a field called optogenetics.
Can you explain that for us? What is optogenetics?
In the simplest terms, it is the technology of using light to control neurons in the brain. You genetically modify a neuron so that it becomes sensitive to light, and then you can literally turn that neuron on or off with a laser.
It allows for incredibly precise control of brain function.
It sounds like science fiction, but it's real, and you can see why it would appeal to Epstein.
Controlling the brain with lasers, it fits a certain psychological profile.
It fits his profile perfectly. Epstein was obsessed with this idea of transhumanism, the notion of improving the human species through technology. He was interested in genetics, in AI, and life extension. He seemed to view the human body as a piece of hardware that could be hacked or upgraded.
And Ed Boyden was working on the absolute cutting edge of that biological interface.
The fact that Epstein is in communication with him places Epstein right in the center of that futuristic and frankly very controversial research.
We have document EFT 02492126 and EFTE as 02490334, which show multiple email headers linking Epstein directly to Boyden. But there's one specific email that completely changes the context of their relationship. That's document EFT 02487308. In this exchange, we see the phrase, "We are buds."
We are buds. 3 words. I want to pause on those 3 words. That is not the language of a financial transaction. That is a language of peerage.
And for context, based on the header analysis of ETA 02487308, this appears to be Joy Ito writing to Epstein, or possibly vice versa. The email threading can be complex, but the buds reference is clearly used to describe the relationship. It solidifies that inner circle status.
It moves the relationship from transactional donor, who writes a check and gets a tax write-off, to social peer. It implies a social bond that transcends the normal donor-recipient dynamic.
Why does that matter from a forensic standpoint?
Because social peerage was the real currency Epstein was after. He didn't just want to fund science, he wanted to be seen as a scientist, or at the very least as a peer of scientists. He wanted a seat at the table.
By securing that buddy status with men like Ito and, by extension, Boyden, he laundered his reputation.
He wasn't Jeffrey Epstein, convicted sex offender anymore. In those circles, he was Jeff, the guy who hangs out with Joy Ito and Ed Boyden.
This aspiration to be part of the intellectual elite, it's further corroborated by another document, EFTA 02348399. The subject line is FWD, Celebrating Marvin Minsky. The date is February 26, 2016.
Marvin Minsky. You can't overstate his importance. He was one of the fathers of artificial intelligence, a truly legendary figure at MIT. He was the Zeus of that particular ecosystem.
And this email chain shows Epstein's integration into the celebration of Minsky's life and work. Minsky passed away in early 2016.
The fact that Epstein is included in the correspondence regarding his memorial or some celebration of his work proves his presence in the absolute inner circle of the AI elite.
It's not just a matter of being on a broad mailing list. The implication is that he was considered relevant to Minsky's legacy by the very people organizing the event.
Precisely. You don't forward internal memorial details to a random donor you are trying to keep at arm's length. You forward them to friends, to colleagues, to family. It cements the idea that Epstein had successfully embedded himself deep inside this community.
We also see references to another scientist, Cesar Hidalgo. Document EFTA EFD 02500609 mentions MIT's anti-disciplinarian Cesar Hidalgo.
Hidalgo is another prominent figure at the Media Lab. He's known for his work on data visualization, on economic complexity, but the key word there is anti-disciplinarian.
That was the brand of the Media Lab at the time.
It was the core of their brand. The idea was that the most interesting, most groundbreaking work happens between the disciplines, not just biology, not just computer science, but in the messy, undefined middle.
And Epstein seems to have latched onto that label.
He loved it. He marketed himself as a polymath, someone who knew a little bit about everything. The anti-disciplinary structure of the lab was the perfect playground for him. It allowed him to float between departments without ever having to be a true expert in any one of them.
Access to people like Hidalgo allowed him to maintain that facade.
So we have Ito, Boyden, Minsky, Hidalgo. The documents begin to map a web of faculty members being discussed in the Epstein-Ito correspondence. This wasn't isolated to one rogue administrator. It was a network.
A network that provided him with something more valuable than just gratitude for his donations.
It provided him with territory, a place to operate.
Which brings us to Block 3, the turf and access. Let's look at the location data from the Pinpoint database.
The data is stark. We're not just looking at emails anymore. We're looking at evidence of physical presence. We see the zip code 02139, that's Cambridge, Massachusetts, appearing 34 times in the records.
Massachusetts appears 41 times.
But the most significant entry is MIT Media Lab. It appears 88 times in the available records.
88 times, that's a massive footprint. That's not a visitor, that's a regular.
It's a very high frequency. It suggests he wasn't just mailing checks from New York or the Virgin Islands. He was there. He was physically walking the halls.
But there is one document that defines this physical access more than any other. It's document EFTA 02569904. The quote in it is explicit.
It is. The quote is, "Receiving you at the Media Lab on my turf."
My turf. That is a very specific, very territorial choice of words.
It is absolutely territorial. It implies ownership, it implies control, and most importantly, it implies safety. Joy Ito is communicating to Epstein, "Come to my domain. You are safe here."
For a man like Epstein, who was a pariah in most polite circles after his 2008 conviction, having a safe harbor at one of the world's most respected institutions, that was invaluable.
My turf implies that Ito had the power to grant that access and, crucially, the power to protect it from outside scrutiny.
It effectively made the Media Lab a private clubhouse for him.
A sanctuary, a place where his money was good and his criminal record was ignored.
But it wasn't just Epstein visiting. He was bringing people with him. He was acting as a connector, a node in the network. Look at documents, EFTDOS 2386105 and EFTA 02570983.
The text is a command. It reads, "Joy, Joshua is. Show him around the Media Lab."
This is a critical distinction. Epstein is not a passive visitor just taking a tour anymore.
He's initiating introductions. He is telling the director of the MIT Media Lab to show a third party around. He is curating the network.
We should probably identify Joshua. Based on the email context and the scientific circles involved, this refers to Joshua Bach, a cognitive scientist and an AI researcher.
Correct. So you have Jeffrey Epstein, a convicted sex offender, directing the head of the Media Lab to give tours to AI researchers. He's acting as a broker.
This validates his self-image as a science philanthropist, and it gives him leverage. If he's the one bringing talent to the lab, he becomes an asset, not just a wallet.
It completely shifts the power dynamic. If he's sourcing talent or making key introductions, the lab becomes beholden to him for more than just his cash.
And that kind of active participation makes the "we didn't know" defense much, much harder to maintain.
You don't take staffing requests or introduction orders from a donor you're trying to keep at arm's length. You only take those kinds of requests from a partner.
Now we have to address the other giant in Cambridge. Block 4. Harvard connections.
And this is where we need to be extremely precise about what the documents in this specific tranche tell us versus what is known from other reporting. We are analyzing the EFTA series and the pinpoint database that were provided. We aren't pulling from outside news reports for this.
Right. And in this EFTA MIT dump, there's a comparative silence when it comes to Harvard's administration. We have the Cambridge location data, which covers both institutions geographically, but we do not have the same volume of direct administrative emails for Harvard that we see in the EFSU2 series.
That is a significant document gap. And let's be clear, it does not mean the relationship didn't exist. We know from the general Cambridge data that he was in the area frequently.
But the granular day-to-day email traffic, the kind of thing we see with Joy Ito at MIT, it's just not present in this specific file set for Harvard.
Why the difference? It's impossible to say for sure. It could be distinct record-keeping practices. It could be that the DOJ subpoena that generated these specific documents was more narrowly targeted at the Media Lab.
Or it could be that Harvard's administration was simply more disciplined in their communications.
It could be. But based strictly on the EFTA 02 series, we cannot prove the same level of buddy intimacy at Harvard. The MIT evidence in this stack is loud and clear. The Harvard evidence is, by comparison, quiet.
I do want to flag one thing in the sources, just to avoid any confusion for listeners. We see references to the Golden Boy's Joseph Epstein.
We have to clarify this for the record. This is a very common point of confusion in keyword searches. Joseph Epstein is a well-known essayist and writer. He is not Jeffrey Epstein.
The presence of Joseph Epstein in the source material, specifically regarding the Golden Boys, is a literary reference. It's likely related to other academic texts that were swept up in the data set.
It's just forensic hygiene to distinguish the two. We do not want to conflate a writer with a sex offender, so based strictly on the EFTA 02 series, the evidence points overwhelmingly at the Media Lab's internal culture.
Let's widen the lens a bit now to the broader scientific social scene in which all this took place. Block 5, the Edge Foundation and the dinner diplomacy.
This is the mechanism of what was called the third culture. The Edge Foundation was run by John Brockman, and while his name isn't the primary focus of these specific document headers, the annual Fellows event mentioned in EFTA 024638819, that's the key to understanding this entire social scene.
The document mentions an annual Fellows event, and Media Lab aims to trigger. It speaks to a convening of minds. What exactly was this third culture?
It's the idea that scientists were taking the place of literary intellectuals as the primary thinkers of our time, and the Edge Foundation dinners were the salon for this new culture. They were legendary. They brought together billionaires and biologists, tech moguls and theoretical physicists all in one room.
A modern-day salon.
A marketplace is a better word for it. You have the scientists on one side, people who are brilliant but constantly, desperately in need of funding. And on the other side, you have the billionaires, people with unlimited capital who crave intellectual legitimacy.
So why do the scientists go? Why do they take the meeting with someone like Epstein?
The funding and the freedom that comes with it. Federal grants from the NIH or the NSF, they are slow. They are incredibly bureaucratic. And they are, by their nature, risk-averse.
If you want to study something really out there, something anti-disciplinary, the government probably won't fund it.
Exactly. Private money, like the kind Epstein was offering, is fast. It's often unrestricted.
Meaning there are no strings attached.
It means you don't have to write a 50-page report every 6 months justifying your existence to a government panel. For a researcher working in a field like neurobiology or AI, that kind of unrestricted money is oxygen.
So the trade-off is clear. The scientists get funding for their blue sky projects. What does the donor get in return?
Legitimization. When you are sitting at a dinner table discussing the origins of the universe with Nobel laureates, you aren't a convicted sex offender anymore. You are a patron of the arts and sciences, a modern-day Medici.
And we see a pattern in the emails of Epstein checking in, like in document EFT 02243466, and reacting to press, specifically about a 60-minute segment.
The email reads, "Loved the 60-minute segment on the MIT Media Lab." This is feedback. It's a feedback loop between the donor and the institution he's funding.
It shows he was watching closely.
It shows they were watching together. The scientists and NATOs, they value the coverage, they value the buzz, and Epstein is consuming the media narrative of the lab that he is bankrolling. It shows a shared interest in the public profile of the institution. They were, in a sense, partners in brand building.
Which leads us directly into Block 6. What did they know? This is about the institutional response. The ignorance defense, the idea that they just didn't realize who he was, it completely collapses when you look at the evidence of their own monitoring.
Document EFTA 02343128 is the smoking gun for this. The subject line is FWD Google Alert MIT Media Lab. The date is September 16th, 2014.
Joyito is forwarding Google alerts about his own lab.
Think about what that means. They were actively monitoring the press. You don't set up Google alerts for things you aren't worried about, or at the very least for things you aren't actively managing.
They were hyper-aware of the Media Lab's public image, and by 2014, Epstein was already a convicted sex offender. His reputation was radioactive. Any association with him carried an immense risk.
The fact that they are monitoring the press about the lab suggests they are extremely vigilant about how the lab is perceived by the outside world.
Exactly. And then you have document EFTA 02338478. They want to do a press conference with me right off. This indicates a high-level concern about media engagement and public relations.
Now, compare that anxiety with the We Are Buds email. On the one hand, privately, they are friends, come to my turf. On the other hand, publicly, they are managing press conferences and scrubbing their own website to say MIT instead of Media Lab.
The inconsistency is the evidence.
It's evidence of calculation. It proves they were not naive. They knew the reputation cost. They did the math. The decision to take the money, especially that $736,000 post-conviction, was not an accident. It was a calculated risk.
They believed the money was worth the potential PR hit.
Provided they could manage the optics, they thought they could contain it. They thought they were smarter than the story.
They thought they could take the money in the dark and keep their reputation in the light.
Now, before we synthesize all this, we have to address Block 7, source integrity. We have a lot of documents in the source list that have sensational titles, things like Elon Satanic Musk or Bill Gates Crimes.
We need to be very clear here. As forensic auditors, we look for primary documentation. Bank transfers, emails, flight logs. We do not deal in rumor.
We have reviewed the file headers regarding these satanic claims and the population control narratives that are found in the broader source dump.
And the verdict is simple.
Unproven. We have to be disciplined. There is no documentation for these claims in the financial or communication logs of the MIT Media Lab or the Epstein estate that are contained within this data set. We see emails about buds and turf and donations. We do not see emails about satanic rituals.
These sources appear to be external compilations or conspiracy theories that are not corroborated by the primary evidence in the EFTA series or the pinpoint database.
They remain outside the forensic record. If we cannot prove it with a document, we do not say it happened. It's as simple as that.
There is also the intelligence question. We see sources like Innovation, Dual Use, and Security, which discusses biological risks. Some have speculated that this implies the labs were part of some intelligence operation.
You have to look at the content of that source. That document is a textbook or an academic paper on the concept of dual-use technology. Technologies that can be used for both good and harm, like biotechnology. It's an academic discussion about risk.
So is there a single email in this tranche linking Epstein to a specific intelligence operation or a honey trap within these labs?
No. There is no email in the EFTA chain that supports that conclusion.
So while the academic subject matter itself includes things like dual use, the evidence in these files doesn't support the idea that the Media Lab itself was an intelligence front.
Not based on these records, no. The records support a narrative of institutional greed. They document the exchange of money for access and legitimacy. They do not document intelligence coercion. Institutional greed is documented. Intelligence coercion is not. We have to follow the money, not the movie plot.
So let's synthesize this. What is the story the records tell us about the scientists?
The story is one of a transaction, a very clear transaction. The scientists didn't just take the checks, they gave turf. They gave physical and social space to a man who had lost his standing in civil society.
Epstein traded his cash for their intellectual credibility, and Joy Ito acted as the gatekeeper for that trade.
Ito managed the optics, MIT versus Media Lab, while simultaneously maintaining the personal relationship buds. He tried to have it both ways. He tried to build a firewall between the cash and the conscience of the institution.
And the timeline is the final nail in that coffin.
Donations continued well after the 2008 conviction. The Google alerts show they were watching the news cycle. The emails from 2013 to 2016 show continued privileged access. The idea that they didn't know or didn't realize the extent of Epstein's crimes is completely contradicted by their own obsession with press management and anonymity.
The records show the laboratory doors were open, the alerts were set, the press releases were managed, and the checks cleared. The scientists had all the data points they needed to make a moral decision. The ledger shows they chose the money.
They calculated the cost of his reputation against the value of his checkbook, and they decided the check tip was heavier.
Next time, the lawyers.
You have just heard an analysis of the official record. Every claim, name, and date mentioned in this episode is backed by primary source documents. You can view the original files for yourself at epsteinfiles.fm. If you value this data-first approach to journalism, please leave a 5-star review wherever you're listening right now. It helps keep this investigation visible. We'll see you in the next file.